Ethan lived alone on the top floor of an old apartment in the oldest district of the city. The roof was leaking, the walls were crumbling. Night had fallen, heavy rain poured down. The wind slammed doors and rattled windows. He tried to focus on his book, but the silence made him uneasy. A glass shattered. At first he blamed the wind, but then a handprint appeared on the window. The fingers moved slowly as if alive. His heart pounded. The doorbell rang. Ethan, finding no one, heard it ring again and again. The sound was muffled, piercing, unbearable. The lights flickered, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ethan held his breath and ran to the stairs. The steps seemed endless, his heart beating faster with each one. At the end of the stairs, Ethan found himself in the fog-covered garden of an old abandoned hospital. At the end of the stairs, Ethan found himself in the fog-covered garden of an old abandoned hospital. A rusty sign read, "Closed since 1987. As he approached the door, it creaked open on its own, revealing an almost completely dark interior. The corridors were narrow, damp, cables hanging from the ceiling, rusty stretchers overturned. Every step echoed between metal and concrete. In a corner, a stretcher moved on its own. The silence was broken only by muffled whispers and distant crying of a baby. Ethan couldn't tell if the sounds were real or imagined. His heart nearly stopped.
Walking down the corridor, faceless doctors in white coats emerged from closed rooms. They held rusty surgical tools and approached Ethan, whispering, "Our new patient is here." Ethan stepped back, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. Walls shifted, shadows followed him. Footsteps and whispers grew louder with every step. Silhouettes resembling him passed through the corners, yet when he turned, there was only emptiness. Ethan felt he was no longer alone. Trying to escape, Ethan tripped and fell. A cold, bony hand touched his wrist. A shadow whispered, "You'll never leave here." He scrambled into another room filled with dark, oppressive silence. Shadows twisted into shapes, ghosts of people he thought he knew but couldn't remember, deformities, faceless figures. Opening doors revealed blood-stained stretchers, old medical tools, darkened eyes, and whispers emerging from the darkness. The hospital ignored the rules of reality and time. Corridors twisted endlessly, rooms changed, and Ethan couldn't find the exit he wanted. Each moment felt like a mixture of past and future. Old nurses, lost children, and whispering patients surrounded him. Time itself had become his enemy. Hours, minutes, and seconds had no meaning. Ethan stopped in a corridor that seemed endless. Faceless doctors stood in line, silently holding rusty instruments. Footsteps quickened, whispers turned into screams. Summoning all his courage, Ethan ran. But the corridor shifted, walls moved, shadows tried to trap him. He fell to the floor. A cold hand touched his wrist again. The shadow whispered, You'll never leave here. At this point, Ethan had reached the peak of fear and helplessness. His heart raced, his breath came in gasps, yet he kept moving, desperate for an exit. Finally, Ethan reached a window. Outside, the hospital's massive structure emerged from the rain and fog. A distant child's voice echoed, "Please, get me out of here." Ethan was no longer alone. Corridors, shadows, and faceless doctors continued to haunt him. No matter how far he ran, the hospital had become his prison. The story doesn't end here. The corridors are endless, shadows alive, whispers ongoing. Ethan thought he could find relief at the window, but the corridors continued to shift. Walls twisted, the ceiling threatened to collapse. Puddles of dark water reflected his trembling silhouette. The corridors were a labyrinth. Ethan had no idea which direction he was heading. Suddenly, a door creaked open, releasing a cold breath. Peering inside, he saw an old nurse uniform lying on the floor as if someone had just left it. Shadows darted past him, but when he turned, the room was empty. As Ethan walked, time became a maddening puzzle. Entering one door, he found himself back in a room he had just passed seconds ago. He heard echoes of his own footsteps, and sometimes even his voice whispering. On the walls of one room, drawings of former patients appeared, their pencil-drawn eyes following him. Some faces were familiar, though he couldn't place them. Each line seemed to recall a memory of fear. Whispers came from the walls. "You cannot leave. We are watching. The new patient." Ethan realized some whispers recounted memories from his own past. Down the corridor, an old nurse walked with a faceless doctor, their shadows blending. Ethan watched, heart racing, as whispers grew louder and his own breathing echoed in the hall. Ethan ran from door to door as shadows pursued him. Every corner revealed a new horror. Blood-stained stretchers, walls covered in ghostly faces, the ceiling sagging, deep pits in the floor. He tripped and fell. A cold, bony hand gripped his wrist. The whisper returned, "You will never leave." Fear and desperation reached their peak. Ethan hid in an old archive room. Dusty shelves held patient files. Flipping through them, he discovered that the hospital had never truly closed. Secret experiments had been conducted. Files listed missing children, faceless patients, and adults chosen for new experiments. One file contained Ethan's own name, with dates and notes he had no memory of. New subject, Ethan, no escape. The corridors darkened further, shadows grew, whispers intensified. Ethan reached another window. The rain and fog revealed the massive hospital structure, but on the glass he saw not his own eyes, but the eyes of a faceless doctor. From afar, a child's voice called, "Please, get me out of here." Ethan realized he was trapped forever. Corridors, shadows, faceless doctors, and whispers would haunt him endlessly. No escape existed. The nightmare was eternal.